AM 1460 WXBR. Peter Czymbor here with you on this Tuesday morning. This Saturday night, live from Las Vegas on Showtime pay-per-view, boxing's pound-for-pound kingpin Floyd Mayweather defends his welterweight championship against Robert Guerrero. In calling that fight for Showtime pay-per-view will be color commentator Al Bernstein. He joins us this morning. Al, good morning.
Nice to be with you.
Al, I think the first thing that a lot of people said when this fight was announced is that it would be on Showtime pay-per-view. Rather unique for Floyd Mayweather pay-per-views, as he is so closely associated with HBO. I can't recall the last time he had a fight that wasn't on HBO. He's infamously and notoriously gotten in tiffs with HBO commentators before. Now you get the seat to call the fight.
It's interesting. That switchover that he did. Now he signed a deal to do a number of fights on Showtime. Was obviously a big move in the boxing and the broadcasting industry, and it has called as much attention on this fight for that reason as anything else. It's for us obviously at Showtime. It's great to be able to do a fight of this magnitude because it's a fight that everybody, both boxing purists and the casual fan, will pay attention to. And so it's fun to be on that world that window to the world. And I was very lucky that in the 1980s I was able to live through what was one of boxing's greatest eras and do many of the big pay-per-views involving Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, and Tommy Hearns. And in fact, this fight comes on the 30th anniversary of the first pay-per-view fight I ever did with Marvin Hagler and Roberto Duran. So this is fun for me because I get to be on a fight that is, really important.
And with our studios based in Brockton, Massachusetts, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about Marvin Hagler a little later on in the interview. But this fight being on Showtime pay-per-view as opposed to HBO for a Floyd Mayweather fight, really significant, like you mentioned. A few years back, the other big name in boxing that will generate casual sports fan interest outside of boxing purists, that being Manny Pacquiao. He did a one-off fight on Showtime pay-per-view. This time, Floyd, it seems, is in more of a long-term situation with Showtime?
Yeah, that's a very astute question because Pacquiao, we did the Pacquiao-Mosley fight, and obviously they were trying to create a long-lasting relationship, and it didn't quite work out. But in this case, there is a deal in place for a Mayweather fight. Up to his next 6 fights, however many he fights in the next 6, will be on Showtime. So it's I believe a 3-year deal. So if they don't get 6 fights out of this, they get 4. However many they get, he is pretty well locked in.
Once again, we're chatting with Al Bernstein, Showtime boxing commentator here on AM 1460 WXBR, talking about this Saturday night's pay-per-view, Floyd Mayweather versus Robert Guerrero. Al, Floyd Mayweather, known to the casual sports fan, known to the general public at large. Robert Guerrero, not so much. He's a guy who, like Floyd Mayweather, started off as a junior lightweight, has moved up a few weight classes and been successful, but not quite as well known. What are his chances to dethrone Floyd Mayweather? No one has yet.
Well, he brings something into this fight that is kind of interesting. The last fight that Mayweather had a year ago, exactly almost a year to the day it will be, was against Miguel Cotto, and it was a much more competitive fight than some of the recent ones have been with Floyd Mayweather, and we saw a less mobile version of Floyd. Now at age 36, after another year layoff, and amazingly, he defies logic by coming back after these layoffs and being very, very effective. Well, here we are after a year layoff now at 36. He's facing a man who has a certain couple skill sets that could make this a very, very intriguing fight. Mayweather tends to back himself against the ropes these days, and he's very effective at counterpunching off it. But his big move that fans see is when he rolls his left shoulder over, and he's got a certain defensive posture that takes away the right hand from a normal right-hander, and then the only thing that can be landed is the left hook, and that's a wider punch, and Mayweather finds a way to block it or slip it. But when you're lefty, and Mayweather does that shoulder roll when you're on the ropes, your left hand is delivered in a much straighter and quicker fashion. And Guerrero is a fighter who is very good at fighting against fighters on the ropes. He mugs them, even though he's a man outside the ring who's helped his wife fight through cancer. He's extraordinarily spiritual and religious. The fact of the matter is, when he gets inside the ring, he's willing to bend a few of the Marcus of Queensberry rules. And when he has somebody against the ropes, he does do that. So a combination of that plus being a lefty and being able to deliver those punches could mean some trouble for Mayweather when he's on the ropes.
In watching the Showtime All Access shows that they've been airing periodically leading up to this fight, one thing Floyd Mayweather said on that show that I was obviously aware of, but it's not something I really think about. He is in his 17th year as a professional boxer. You mentioned moments ago that he's 36 years old, and one thing that we haven't discussed yet is that in between his last fight against Miguel Cotto and this fight, he did a stint in jail. Do you think the chances are more likely than ever that Floyd Mayweather is going to start to show his age?
Well, he is in his mid, heading toward his late 30s, and you make the point, he's been a veteran of the sport. Now, he hasn't been taking beatings, that's for sure. And there was the brief jail stint that I think at the end of the day, more of an emotional issue when he had to deal with it than anything else. He was only in there for a very short period of time, so I don't know if it did anything physically to him. But, let's put it this way. If somebody asked me from a competitive standpoint, would you rather announce the fights of Floyd Mayweather when he's 28 or when he's 36? I'll take 36 because we have a much better chance of these fights being more competitive and closer like the Cotto one was. And I think that's just common sense. And we did see a few indications in the Cotto fight in which Cotto probably won 4 rounds of that fight and probably hit Floyd more than anyone has in the last 3 fights combined.
It's interesting you take a look at a guy like Muhammad Ali, who had all those great fights towards the tail end of his career, probably the most noteworthy being the thriller in Manila against Joe Frazier. Part of what made those fights so competitive and so dramatic was the fact that both Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, despite being the best in the world at the heavyweight division at that point, were a little bit shop-worn.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's what makes these fights sometimes better. And because, people's defenses maybe have just suffered a little bit. They both kind of get to the same level, and that's a key thing with Mayweather. Even a Floyd Mayweather, like you said, Ali Frazier, whose skills maybe rode just a touch, are still terrific fighters, and they're still very good to watch. But it's kind of an equalizer that at least if somebody can challenge Mayweather at this juncture, and there's Guerrero now, and then the next fighter that presumably is in line to fight him, that wants to fight him, Canelo Alvarez, who just beat Austin Trout in a terrific fight that we had on Showtime 2 weeks ago, or a little over a week ago. And Canelo's a 22-year-old young Mexican star who is the 154-pound titleist, and Floyd would likely have to fight him at some weight above 147. He's the next in line, presumably. If in fact Mayweather beats Guerrero. And we should point out, if Guerrero wins this fight, there is a rematch clause in effect.
AM 1460 WXBR. Once again, we're chatting with Al Bernstein about this Saturday's Floyd Mayweather-Robert Guerrero fight. Al, one thing that we haven't mentioned, Robert Guerrero, unexpectedly, I should say, for those who have followed his career and know the way he has portrayed himself and his character, very uniquely got caught with a gun at an airport prior to this fight, and is actually going to have to face a judge 10 days after he faces Floyd Mayweather in the ring as a result of being caught with that gun at JFK Airport in New York, where, as we know from the Plaxico Burr situation, they have amongst the strictest gun laws in the entire country. How do you think that will affect Robert Guerrero going into this fight?
Yeah, it may be hanging over his head. For those people that don't know Robert Guerrero, among his many attributes in life is the fact that his wife, Casey, who suffered from cancer and had to have a bone marrow transplant. He literally took a year off boxing to be with her and tend to her. And I have a similar history in my life, so I appreciate and can understand that situation for him. And he's a mentally tough person. And so I think this hanging over him will not affect him as much as it might somebody else. The explanation for the whole gun thing, if you look at it on the surface, it seems totally absurd. But the gun was with him, as I understand it, but almost by accident. They didn't take it to New York for any other reason. He was supposed to do something with it when he got back at a shooting range or something. And his wife had it with her, and they ended up with it with them. And what people do need to know, and I'm not trying to defend him or in any way mitigate the circumstances. It was in a lockbox, and he brought it to their attention and showed them his license to carry it in California, which he did not realize didn't translate to New York. So while it may have been not the brightest thing to do, there was no nefarious thing going on with him, and he did everything he thought to comply with what was good common sense.
And while it may not have been an intelligent move on his part,
Right.
as you mentioned, probably not criminally intentioned.
There was no criminal intentions. I think we can safely say that. And you're right. And I hope that I really do hope they take that into account in dealing with this, because I think the intent of the law is probably part of the issue.
One characteristic of Robert Guerrero, which we have not seen leading up to this fight with Floyd Mayweather, that might hurt the actual business in promotion and pay-per-view sales of the fight, is that historically, Robert Guerrero is excellent in dealing with the media. As a matter of fact, I would argue that he got this fight with Floyd Mayweather based on the amount of press releases his camp has put out campaigning for this fight.
It's usually about 100 a day, isn't it?
Mario Serrano does a good job as publicist with Robert Guerrero. Robert Guerrero's probably got this fight based on his press releases campaigning for this fight just as much as what he's done in the ring. But leading up to this fight with Floyd Mayweather, he has only done the press which he's been contractually obligated to do by Showtime and Golden Boy Promotions, the promotions of this event, and won't talk to folks like us here in Boston because he simply doesn't want to answer questions about his gun charges, presumably. How much do you think that will affect the buzz around this fight heading into this Saturday?
That's a very interesting point. That obviously, and you're right, Robert Guerrero is a very, very good interview. He's an interesting young man. He's bright. He's intelligent. I think it's a shame that happened on many levels, because it is affecting, that other part of it that he can't. And to be perfectly candid, if I was him, I would do those interviews anyway. All you have to do is say, "Gee, I just, it was an unfortunate situation. I feel bad about it. That's as far as I can go." I mean, at that point, what are you going to do? You're on the phone with him. You're going to hit him with a club to make him answer? It is what it is. I asked it. The thing I brought up, they made a big thing about him not talking about it. Well, I brought it up when I was interviewing him for the boxing channel, which of course I was with Showtime. But I said, look, what people are curious about is, do you think that'll have any impact on you in the fight? That's all you're really interested in. That's all. For 9 out of 10 of the people that would question him about it, that would be the way they would phrase it. There was going to be the 1 or 2 people that are goofballs and phrase it in some way that is bizarre, or don't, or decide they're going to launch it to some kind of moral tirade about it. But for the most part, people are curious about how's it going to impact this fight. And I don't even think that's an unfair question. It is, because it exists, and I think it's much better if you just deal with it.
Once again, we're chatting with Al Bernstein here on AM 1460 WXBR. He'll be providing commentary for this Saturday night's Floyd Mayweather-Robert Guerrero fight for Showtime pay-per-view in Las Vegas. One thing that Floyd Mayweather has been accused of in the past is somewhat cherry-picking opponents that suit his style well, because he wants to protect his legacy as going down as an undefeated fighter in the record books. Do you think that's the case here with Robert Guerrero? Does Floyd see something in him that he likes and he thinks he can exploit to his own benefit?
I don't, and I actually, that's what interests me from a purely stylistic standpoint. Even though Guerrero had jumped up 2 weight divisions to take on, he does like taking on smaller people, and that's part of it. But and he's never really taken on. When he fought at 154 against Cotto, he had some issues. Although Cotto was truly a 147-pounder, went up to 154. But from a purely stylistic standpoint, this isn't the easiest style matchup for him. So it's intriguing to me that it ended up being Robert Guerrero. I actually don't exactly have an opinion on why that was so. You mentioned they've been like political campaigners in trying to get this fight. They have been unabashed in their efforts, and they did it at a time when it didn't even seem reasonable. You remember a year or 2 ago, it was like, why are you doing this? You don't have any chance to get this fight. And then he beat Selçuk Aydin, and he beat Berto at 147, and it became a legitimate discussion to see if he would get this fight. So it is interesting. This is one of those ones where I'm looking at it thinking he didn't pick the exact best style for himself.
The last guy I remember spending a few years campaigning for a big money pay-per-view fight, which he ultimately got well over his natural weight class, and he won, was when Floyd Mayweather fought Oscar De La Hoya, I believe, in 2007 at this point. Any similarities?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. No one thought, when he was first doing it, people thought, oh, that's silly.
He was a 130-pounder calling up a middleweight.
Yeah, it's Oscar is so much bigger than you, and there's just no way that you could possibly fight him. And that's I agree. There are some similarities because it came to fruition. Now Floyd Mayweather had a little bigger bully pulpit than Robert Guerrero did. So Guerrero is kind of the little engine that could in terms of PR, and it shows you what you can do with absolute doggedness. And you know what's funny? This is an inside baseball comment, but you were talking about Mario Serrano, his PR guy, who's very active. They've made him a non-factor during this period of where this blackout's been invoked and where it's been tightly controlled by the promoters and the network and all the rest of it. So that element that we saw of Guerrero being kind of this independent maverick, if you will, to bring up another interesting point, the very thing that they were looking for in him hasn't emerged, like you say, as much as we would have thought.
AM 1460 WXBR. Once again, we're chatting with Al Bernstein here on the Metro South Morning program. The other big name in boxing that casual fans know that we mentioned earlier on in the interview is Manny Pacquiao. We talked earlier that perhaps Floyd Mayweather might be getting a little bit older. Well, he's certainly getting older, but maybe he'll be showing his age sooner than later inside the ring, which could result in him facing more adversity in his fight than we've traditionally seen him have. A guy who's clearly slipped is Manny Pacquiao. His last two fights, a decision loss to Tim Bradley, albeit a controversial decision loss to Tim Bradley, and then a one-punch, devastating knockout loss to Juan Manuel Marquez. Is the idea of Mayweather versus Pacquiao all but dead at this point? It seemed like the big fight.
For other reasons as well, because of the politics of it, the top-rank Golden Boy Cold War, and now the fact that HBO made an announcement that they are not working with Golden Boy anymore, so even if there was a co-promotion, that would be difficult. The irony of the Pacquiao situation is, many people believe he beat Bradley, although I don't think it was his best performance by far. And in the Marquez fight, he looked like he was on his way to winning. He had been knocked down earlier, but then he had the fight in his control, broke Marquez's nose, and for all the world looked like he was headed toward what might be a win, and of course he got stopped. But yeah, clearly it's taken the bloom off the rose for the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. That will go down, to me, as one of the most unfortunate misses that boxing's had. Boxing hasn't had that many big misses in the last decade. The mainstream media doesn't really cover boxing so much, so they act like boxing never makes the fights that it's supposed to make. Well, truthfully, boxing, for the most part, over the last 8 or 9 or 10 years, has made most of the fights it's supposed to make, but this one didn't get made.
You mentioned earlier Canelo Alvarez fighting Austin Trout last weekend. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it drew something in the ballpark of 45,000 people to a stadium in Texas.
Yeah, it was about close to 40,000 at the Alamo Dome. So it was a wonderful scene, and it was very exciting. And both Austin Trout and Canelo Alvarez fought very, very well. I thought it was a much closer fight than the judges had it. They had wide margins for Canelo Alvarez for the most part. But I thought it was a terrific fight and very exciting.
And you talked earlier about how Floyd Mayweather traditionally likes to fight men smaller than him. It seems like next in line is Canelo Alvarez, who's a little bit bigger than him, a natural junior middleweight.
Exactly, 154 and a pretty powerful puncher. But I think Mayweather felt that based on what he saw against Trout, there were certain things that he might be able to do against him. And also, he probably reckoned appropriately, if I'm going to have to fight Canelo Alvarez, it's better that I fight him right now when he's 22 and I'm 36 than when he's 24 and I'm 38. And I think that's probably a correct calculation.
Once again, you're listening to AM 1460 WXBR. Peter Czymbor here with you on this Tuesday morning, chatting with Al Bernstein, who will have the call of Floyd Mayweather's fight with Robert Guerrero this Saturday night on Showtime pay-per-view in Las Vegas. Al, outside of broadcasting, you're also an author. You recently released a book, 30 Years, 30 Undeniable Truths About Boxing. One particular anecdote I'd like you to tell on the air if you can, due to the fact that I mentioned earlier our studio is based in Brockton, is that you have some history of broadcasting boxing in Brockton and memorable ones at that.
Yeah, we came to the Massachusetts area for a lot of fights when I did the ESPN Top Rank Boxing Series through the 80s and into the 90s. And the fans there, they enjoy their boxing. And on occasion, this may come as a shock, they might get a little rowdy. And we were doing a show, this was in the early 80s, I think, and it was in Brockton, I believe. And Sal Marciano were doing our open, and the fans had a habit of, for some reason, when we went to Massachusetts, or maybe it was the level of where we were at, and fans would always there was always seemed to be something going on with the fans. Some guy would walk through our shot in the middle, or there'd be something going on. Well, this particular time, the fans just in the area above us, who I may have had a couple of drinks, I'm just guessing, for reasons known only to themselves, they were mad because of the delay that we weren't getting into the fight, and they're yelling at Sal and I, you suck, you suck. That was like a chant. And I was pretty new to broadcasting, and I'm like, wow, why are they mad at us? What did I do to these people, And getting through the open was not easy. And Sal, of course, was very calm about it, and he was joking. And he said, well, you can see they love us here in Brockton. And that was that freaked me out just a little bit. But he told me afterwards, he said, you know what? He said, at least they're not throwing anything. And I said, well, that's good.
And this is prior to ESPN being what we now know as the worldwide leader in sports.
Yeah, for your younger listeners and that's part of what I talk about in the book, which I think I've gotten really fun response to because people don't know about it. Back in 1980, 81, 82, the early 80s, ESPN was a blip on the radar screen. It was in maybe, maybe 10 million homes, period, 15, 20, 30 million homes the max, even when we get into the mid-80s. And we always wondered whether our next check would clear, And so the Top Rank Boxing Series was the best watched series on ESPN, but it was, we still didn't know who exactly was watching. I joke in the book that we knew the number was probably somewhere between the number of illegitimate children of Evander Holyfield, his father, and the number of lawsuits annually filed against Don King. So we know it was a big number, but not exactly big by TV standards.
Well, AM 1460 WXPR, we're chatting with Al Bernstein. Al, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program. If you ever come to Brockton again, we'll invite you in our studio so that you can have a more positive experience than the last time you were here in the 80s.
And it was funny. I had to put with that one story in because it was pretty crazy. We've had some great experiences in Boston, believe me, over the years and in that area. So I'd love to come by and visit. And by the way, since we mentioned a book, the best place for people to get it is Amazon.com. And we just released the audio version of the book, which is out this week, and they can get that on audible.com. So,
well, we'll mention that the book is 30 years, 30 undeniable truths about boxing. Floyd Mayweather versus Roberto Guerrero.
Yeah, I hope they'll be watching on Saturday.
That's Al Bernstein joining us here on AM 1460. Al, before we let you go, I know a lot of the longtime listeners would love to hear it. Any good Marvin Hagler stories from the 80s, as you called a lot of his pay-per-view fights?
Oh, my God. Well, I try very hard to be as neutral as I possibly can about boxers and about fights, and I don't want to in any way have any biases. But I can tell you the one thing that I can say since he's long retired, I enjoyed Marvin Hagler and respected him as a fighter and a man. I'm going to say as much as any fighter that I've ever met or ever announced. He stayed in one weight division his whole career. He had one set of managers and trainers his whole career. He was disciplined. He was a great fighter and was just the best. Now, I did, unfortunately, have a few faux pas with that where it looks like I didn't love Marvin as much as I professed, because a couple of big moments for him, I kind of screwed up. I announced the Hagler-Mugabe fight, which was his last fight except then he fought Leonard. And I was interviewing him, and the producer said something in my ear, so he blocked out what Marvin was saying. So I heard the first part, but then I heard the last part of what Marvin said, which was, would you mind if I left? I thought he wanted to leave the interview. And I turned to him and I said, oh, yeah. I said, Marvin, you did enough tonight. God, congratulations. And I turned to the camera to start doing a close, and I could tell he was kind of befuddled. What had preceded it was he explained how many title defenses he had, and he was thinking of retiring. Would you mind if I left? And of course, that needed a quite different response than the one I gave him. I didn't hear that because the producer was talking in my ear, so I managed to somehow ignore a potential retirement announcement from one of the biggest name in boxing at the time. So I've had a few interesting moments where I've messed up with Marvin, but we have a great relationship, and it was a joy calling those fights. I did his fight with Duran. I did his fight with Tommy Hearns, the great fight with Tommy Hearns at Caesar's Palace. So I did a number of Marvin fights, and those memories will never be less than special for me.
And just for the record, because this debate is prone to start arguments and sometimes fistfights in bars all over this region, you did have Hagler beating Leonard in what was his last fight.
I did indeed. I felt he won the fight by 2 points, and I would point to the CompuBox numbers as the ultimate, arbiter. He landed more jabs than Ray Leonard, and if the other guy's the boxer and you landed more jabs, how did you end up losing? I thought it was a very close fight, and I don't think it's impossible for Ray Leonard to get a 1-point win or for it to be a draw. Obviously, Jojo Guerrero's 118-111 score was absurd, and I do think Marvin made a serious tactical error by fighting the first 3 or 4 rounds as a righty. He made a big mistake, but I still think at the end of the day he won more rounds than Ray Leonard in that fight. But people were so amazed that Ray was in the hunt that. So no matter where I would do this radio show, even if it was in Maryland or wherever, I would be saying the same thing. I thought Hagler won the fight.
Well, we've been chatting with Al Bernstein here on AM 1460 WXBR. We look forward to your call of Floyd Mayweather versus Robert Guerrero this Saturday night on Showtime pay-per-view. Al, thanks so much for coming on the show this morning. We have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you.
That's Al Bernstein joining us here on AM 1460 WXBR. We'll step aside for a quick breather. Back with more of the program after this.